Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to convene us back into session at 9:03. And as we get started, once again, recognize the amazing hospitality of the University of Arizona. Greatly appreciative of the tech services and breakfast this morning. That burrito was roughly the size of my first car. There was was quite a treat. So with that, Alicia, do we need to do roll, or are we just continuing from yesterday? We do need to do roll. Then please, if you would.
Member Clay. Here. Member Hagerman. Member Haley. Here. Superintendent Hoffman. Member Kravickas. Member Meyerson. Dr. Robbins. President Core.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to start out with a discussion of boardsmanship and the development of the board's collective commitments. Executive Director Williams.
Thank you, President Core and members. Welcome to day 2 of the best 2 days ever. So most of you are familiar with the board's collective commitments, as I personally staffed you when you came onto the board, and then 3 of our members were on the board when we originally established a collective commitments back in 2018. Collective commitments are meant to be, I look at it this way. When you buy an old house and you own that house, but there are generations before you and generations after you who will also own that house, right? So if I'm buying that old house, I'm protecting the house's story, and I'm learning the story of the others, and I'm saving the history of that home, right? So each of you are individual board members who are currently holding the seat now, right? So the collective commitment is, how do we operate as individual board members, but then also how do we operate as the board, the full board? And how do we ensure that we continue the story and continue the historical knowledge of that board or that organization? Okay. Now, most of you have asked you to reflect upon your time in service on the board to determine what's working well for you personally, what's working as a full board. And that conversation in your mind, in your reflections, can be member to member, member to board, member to staff. Collective commitments also allow for us as staff members to know what's expected of us. It allows for you to know what's expected of you and what you expect of your fellow board members. So, as I am the former teacher, we're going to start with just some quick self-reflections. If you notice, there are cards that I passed out, pink cards. The first one we're going to focus on, in the bottom right-hand corner, it says M2M, which stands for member to member. So what I would like for you to do is I would like for you to take 3 minutes to yourself, and I would like for you to write down 2 areas that you believe are working well in the member to member commitments. It could be that you feel respected. It could be that you feel other members are prepared. You feel like your voice is heard. Okay. Anything that you feel is going well. Ready? It looks like most of you are finished. So if you're not, just finish up. Now what I would like for you to do, so Member Meyerson, Member Kravickas, Member Burton, President Kaur, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Haley, Member Clark, Member Clay. So partners, 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 partners. In Kagan strategies, we call this shoulder partners. With your shoulder partner, take 2 minutes to compare your notes, circling anything that is similar. Stations. Now I'm going to ask each group to share out. If your group also had something similar, just like raise your hand, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to come up with some of my own notes so that I can help you all build some collective commitments. So eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Let's start with Dr. Kaur, you and Member Burton.
Sure. You asked us to come up with 2, and both Member Burton and I had multiples of 2. So we didn't follow directions, but I'm not sure what exactly that means, but we overproduced.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. So we both quickly arrived on both our lists of a high level of respect among the members on the board, an appreciation for the different perspectives and backgrounds and lived experiences of each of us. Some others that might have been phrased in slightly different ways, but the members are fully engaged and prepared when they come to the board. The other theme that was of listening, truly listening to different points of view and trying to find some common ground.
Great, thank you. A+. You can pass.
Thank you. Can I get that transcribed in some way?
Yes, I will do that for you. So I heard you say some things, high level of respect and perspectives, experiences, being engaged and prepared for meetings. And then we have active listening and finding common ground. How many other groups had anything pertaining to respect?
We did.
Okay. Engaged and prepared for meetings?
We did.
Okay. Active listening, common ground? Okay.
Kind of.
So If we look at the high level of respect, and many of our groups had that, what does that mean to you? What does that look like? What does the high level of respect or people's perspectives or experiences, what does that look like? Or what does that mean to you personally?
I'll start. I think it goes hand in hand with listening. I think especially this board comes with just a vast knowledge and expertise. And I think it starts with listening and trying to understand the perspective of the other person. A lot of times it's, we don't have the background. And so I think it starts with listening and not coming to a meeting with sort of a preconceived idea of what we think. I think respect means listening to and trying to understand where the other person is coming from, other member is coming from.
Member Burton, if I may, how do you hold yourself accountable to being respectful? What kind of strategies do you take?
Oh, no, boy, that's deep thinking. By listening. I mean, by listening and asking questions and asking for clarification and really trying to understand why another member has an opinion that they do. And I think that's really important.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to share what they believe respect looks like or other people's perspectives? Member Clay?
To me, respect looks like understanding that we are individually working independently, but knowing that we can't move forward unless we work interdependently. Knowing who we are, knowing that there are differences, celebrating that, but respecting that all of us we have the same goals, but we may see it differently on how to get there. So respecting and still celebrating the differences and making a Venn diagram in our heads of what we do agree on so that we can move westward. So respect to me is a body or a system working together towards the same goal and dealing with those things that may be different, but not in a negative way, celebrating them. So my thing is this, if I don't agree with somebody on the board, which I feel you're like my brothers and sisters now. If I don't agree, we can vote differently, we can see things differently, and we can definitely disagree because I know for a fact it's going to happen. But after we finish, we can go to the next room and share a soda because the issue is separate from the relationship. So that is what I feel respect is.
I can add on a little to Jackie. I so appreciate that point. I think one of the things that Carla and I talked about, also I'd written down that I think that the board has sort of this deep commitment to doing versus just discussing. And I feel like that so aligns with the idea of respect, in addition to just sort of, we're all sort of, if we can assume the best of one another, that we have that same outcome of wanting to do on behalf of the kids that we're here to support and serve. I think that ties so deeply down to respect. And I see that from everyone, not only in the engagement that I think President Kaur shared, and kind of the preparedness of the board, but I think that it's a group that wants to take action.
Great, thank you. Rayleigh?
Last thing is when I think of respect, it's also good intent. That when individuals are probing and asking questions, it's from a place of good intent. I know that personally, sometimes when I'm asking questions, I want to jump to my own personal, like, oh, you're making assumptions about why I did something. But I really think that respect is, hey, so-and-so is asking a question from a place of good intent because they're trying to clarify, get to the root. If there's been some contention, why was there contention? So I think that respect that the respect is coming from a place of good intent. So
Thank you. I love how that respect. I love how that share out real quick. We kind of merged the high level of respect into listening, finding common ground, understanding, like Member Clay had spoken of, the issue is separate from the relationship, right? I think that's really important. There was another one, engaged and prepared for meetings. And I saw a few groups raise their hand. I don't recall which ones they were though. Okay, so Member Haley and Superintendent Hoffman, why don't the two of you kind of share out what you discussed for engaged and prepared for meetings?
I think in my brief time on the board and my observations of, I've been in meetings since March of 2022, is that folks come ready and they have questions, they've read the materials, they've likely engaged the state board staff, they've probed, they've looked at data. And I think as we have to either approve programs or make policy decisions or think about new rules or other types of interpretations, having each of us read the materials and understand and internalize so that we can engage during our board meetings, I think it makes us far more effective in achieving our roles and our responsibilities. So.
Okay. Thank you, Member Haley. Any other members wish to either state what that means to them or how they come engaged and prepared for meetings? And let me clarify, I ask how you do it, just in case there's someone else who can learn from what you're doing, or maybe they're interested in what others do. Maybe they feel overwhelmed. Oh, there's a huge book and I would love to know what someone else does in order to become prepared. Yes, Member Kravickas.
One of the things that I like to do, because it's just what I've loved to do for a long time, is look at what other states are doing. Like last night, I was actually reading the NCTQ state policy database. I'm kind of a nerd that way, but I kind of like looking at what other states are doing to get examples and ideas.
Great, thank you. Okay. Member Clay, Member Clark. So we heard from the first group. Where else were you different? What other types of actions did you have a good member to member? They're working well.
I think the only thing we agreed, just about everything I said, she said.
That's good.
I'm looking at this. She had one big paragraph and I had mine in little bullets, but when you brought them all together, it was all about respect, being heard, open to share each other's concerns, seeing each other's landscape, because I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of things I've learned here that some of you are just, this is what I see, and I didn't see that. So, that was really, really strong, sharing, open to share each other concerns and the landscape. But there was really nothing different. It's basically the same.
Great. A+ as well. Member Haley, Superintendent Hoffman, did you have anything that was different?
The one I would add is I do think it's important that we all, I like that Member Haley used the word passionate, as someone to tie in the passion with what I had written about, that we as board members really value student perspectives and ultimately care about the well-being of children in the future.
Right. And that's so true. And I can say from like my personal experience staffing the board, is that there are times where this board will have to make very difficult decisions. And those difficult decisions will come with written and verbal comments from different organizations and different people. But then the question always in the back of the mind is, well, what's best for students, right? And so it may not be popular to the field, but it may be best for students. And this board will have to make tough decisions. And I really appreciate that I'm hearing things such as like having respect, understanding perspectives, putting kids first, because I think that the board will be very successful if they have those cornerstones within their process. Lastly, oh, I'm sorry, A+. Member Kravickas, Member Myers.
My A+ is being diluted.
Well, that's speaking out of turn though, President Clore. So participation, yeah, maybe a referral. Anything different or?
No, I think I alluded to this earlier, but I think we talked a lot about the idea of sort of doing versus discussing. And it feels like, again, given the board's level of preparation, given the deep commitment to being student focused, I think I've sensed a very clear desire, certainly from myself and I think from every board member, of just being a board that takes action and does, and really we want to do something with our time here and versus discussing. So, and I think Member Kravickas also had a really good point on sort of diversity of opinion.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I had a hard time hearing you.
I just wrote that I like that the board has so many diverse viewpoints and experiences and background.
Great. Thank you so much for taking the opportunity to share that with one another and myself about what's working member to member. The next thing I would like for you to do is member to staff. So you have a second pink card on your table. The bottom right-hand corner is, I better state this right. It says S to M, so staff to member. So this 2-3 minutes, these 2-3 minutes, I want you to think, reflect upon what you've experienced from staff to member. And it could be staff updates, it can be phone calls with myself or other staff members, meetings that we have, what's working well, what do you want to ensure sticks around because it's been very beneficial to you. This is you. And with the person sitting next to you, just do a quick share, circling anything that is similar. Let's wrap up. All right. Coming back together. Is there a group that would like to share out some of their discussion? This is for participation points for the ++ to the A+.
I'll go. Just, I have great respect. We both agreed that both Alicia and Catcher are just fantastic and engaging with board members, whether it's individual briefings or relaying information to the Arizona Department of Education or identifying experts that we need to learn and grow from. So that was a common point that obviously Superintendent Hoffman has a different perspective being the head of ADE, but that sort of that relationship between the two and that resourcefulness of helping board members get the information that they need so that we can be informed for board meetings.
Thank you. Does someone have something similar?
Yeah, we had something similar. We had a whole big old long list, front and back, about how awesome we think the staff is. But essentially we agreed on a few things, and member Clay had some things to add on too. But yeah, we agreed that the staff is pretty much fantastic, and that your over communication is one of the key things. And Alicia, you and I have talked about this before, like with the weekly updates, and then also having the prep calls. You know, that we have an opportunity, that we have an hour, you know, with you or Catcher to be able to walk through what's on the agenda and specific things that we have questions about. And also feeling a sense that you guys give very, you know, sound advice for the good of the board and also are unbiased. And that's really important because, as several people have said, we all bring very different things to the table. And so, you know, we come to the board saying, hey, we want to know more about this because we might want to take action on something. So it's very helpful when staff is like, okay, these are your options. This is what you can do. This is what, you know, maybe even like I would recommend, just helping actually staff us properly for the goals or objectives that we want to achieve. And I do think that I'm guessing that a lot of people probably feel the same way, that the transition to the board for a lot of us newer members, which I know is really difficult for you guys because there was like 7 of us, that it has gone very well. Hopefully you feel the same way, because of great staff. And so we're just overflowing praise.
Thank you. It was not meant to be like a
Well, it's not
praise
too
session,
bad.
but I
That's what you
appreciate
get.
it. Our other two groups, is there anything? So what I'm hearing from these two, we have, sounds like we like the briefings. We like being able to have consistent communication, ease of communication, unbiasedness. Keep the transition training program.
Just had to also add in a few other things. Just the logistic support with Melissa and Sandy is just really fantastic. Thank you for the water that you guys provide us. I don't know if you guys know, but the team, they provide us bottled water, not the state. And And then Jessica, we haven't interacted as much with you, but thanks for your research projects. Like, I'm really excited to dig into what you find. We threw a lot at you yesterday and bring it. I think we're excited to learn with you.
Thank you, Member Haley.
I just want to add that staff does a good job at providing the materials in a timely fashion. Yeah, because it really allows the board members to prepare properly and ask questions related to the agenda items. So we are as prepared as we can be. Oh, and one more thing, I definitely want to echo the related to that, reaching out to ADE staff. Because I just think it's a much better than sort of putting an ADA staff person on the spot at a meeting when a question can be usually answered prior to.
And I will say, and we'll talk a little bit about this like the next agenda item, but under Superintendent Hoffman's administration, the communication has been very collaborative, very consistent with the Department of Education. And I appreciate that because it makes my job easier. It makes our staff look good. It makes the department look good when we're able to really answer questions that may come up at a board meeting on the dais, right? So I appreciate that as well.
Can I add while we're on this topic?
Sure.
Sorry. Because I wrote that down too, that, and that's what Member Haley was saying about having a unique perspective, but the collaboration between department staff and board staff and then board members is so critically important. And it's not, yes, it makes us all look good when everything's smooth, but it's also what's best for kids and what's best for implementing the best policies possible. Is everyone being well informed, and then also going back to that respect piece is also having just how much I value the respect and trust that is also displayed towards ADE leaders when they so we had Audrey yesterday, we often have Sean, and so or Terry from ESA, like when our leaders are also presenting, and how critical it is to also have the respect and dialogue both in the meetings and out of the meetings. And I just want to say how much I appreciate that.
Thank you, Superintendent. You don't have to if you don't want to. I want to make sure everyone's heard.
No, I think we echo everything that the other board members have said. I think that there's just such strong organization on your team, Alicia. And I think that allows for just a much more seamless meeting. And again, I think that the opportunity to just name the touch points to have with you prior to the meetings is something that I just also deeply value. I can then go through the board book. I can get all my questions sort of answered and prepared so that I can ask stronger questions than in the meeting. So just thank you so much for that.
Okay. Great. This will be very beneficial as we continue to as staff reflect on our own collective commitments towards the board, because we have those. Okay, we have about 6 more minutes-ish. 7. We've done the work of individual, right? What you appreciate, what you like, what's working well. Now I want you to think of the board. So as the organization, how do you believe the board should operate with the different stakeholders? So we have in our former collective commitments, we touch upon talk about being ambassadors of the board by respecting board's positions and pending issues when meeting with stakeholders. And the stakeholders can be various. It can be legislators, governor's office, the field, teachers you saw at Safeway, whatnot. Promote board strategic priorities, engaging with schools and stakeholders, and attend conferences. Be respectful of staff's responsibilities and workload. Inform the staff of any significant conversations regarding State Board of Ed business. You also have certain aspects of lobbyists, lobbying, media, whatnot. And this board makes it a little bit different because we all have our own individual thing in which we're very active in. So it will be important for the organization to determine how the organization is going to operate so that we have good communication to one another and we understand what we expect from one another. So you could pick a stakeholder group, but how do you believe the board should operate as an organization? If you need additional clarification, let me know.
Just to how we as a body, like the board members, engage with stakeholders, and those stakeholders can be schools, lobbyists, activists, associations, legislature, governor's office, et cetera. So how do we collectively work together and engage outside individuals?
Correct.
So one of the things I was just going to chime in on really quick with that is I know as a board member, I have a lot of parents reach out to me, teachers, meetings. You already know this, Alicia, people will come to me. And so I've tried to make it a point to always, as a board member, come back to you or Catcher and make sure that you know about those conversations, that you know what happened, whether it's a teacher, parent, reporter, so that you can do your job and go, okay, this might be a situation where I do need to reach out to one of the other ABC groups and engage them. So that's where I've always tried to utilize you when I've needed something as a board member, make sure that you're aware and in the loop so that you can reach out to the stakeholders. But we might talk about this a little bit later too, but I am aware of the fact also that as this board is going to be, I think, a really engaged board from what I can tell, which is awesome, that there are other stakeholder groups that may not be used to that. And so that's, I think, something just to kind of like hang and put on everyone's radar, because I know there's times where I've asked for something or we talked about an issue and potentially you've gone to a stakeholder on that issue, but the response either like wasn't given or there was some like, tension's not the right word, but just like didn't get exactly what we needed. So I think the more that we continue to come directly to you and utilize you as kind of like that buffer with stakeholders will help establish almost like a protocol with some of those stakeholders that like, no, they're coming to you on behalf of a member of the board or the board. This is the information that we want or we need. And so I just encourage other board members to keep going through the staff also, because I think that's helpful for everyone.
I think
I
too,
would-
oh, go ahead.
I would
Member
say I would,
Vegas.
I would echo, I'm struggling with putting my words together for lots of reasons, but I would echo what Jenny said, and, you know, I will continue, I'm in the same position to reach out to you guys, float things I might be writing and stuff, and kind of trust you guys to make sure that staying in a certain space I should be in. One of the things that's resonating through my head, and a few times this morning, we've had members here have said, you know, always doing what's best for kids. And when I think of the stakeholders, I think that's where the rub's going to be, because there's a really big difference between doing things for schools and doing things for kids. And I don't mean to bring up controversial stuff. I think that's going to be the really hard part for us, because sometimes what's best for kids is going to make other people unhappy. So I want to put that out there, because I think it's something for us to think about and reflect on, because I think that's going to be where those difficult decisions and votes are going to lie, especially when I think of the external stakeholders coming in, because they're all coming from different perspectives, to your point, you know? And so because I don't know what I'm trying to say, but.
No, you brought up a great point, Member Kravickas, right? So I'm going to use that example. Let's say the board does do something, putting students first instead of schools first, right? And let's say that Member Kravickas, you're at the Safeway and a school leader, it sees you at the deli counter and starts saying, oh, well, your partner, Mr. Smith, said X, Y, and Z, and he starts dogging on Mr. Smith as a board member, right? But then also as the board, I can assume that Member Kravickas is going to be like, Thank you for your comments. However, this is how the board voted, and that is a fellow board member of mine, and I won't be engaging in that type of conversation, right? So thinking about if you're an outsider looking at the board should be a collective unit. Going back to what the member Clay was saying, it's a collective unit who may agree to disagree, but at the end of the day, they're getting the soda in the back, putting on a face, right? Sometimes we have that even with our own families. So, Member Kavickas.
I think that harkens back to my experience of being on legislative staff for so long,
Mhm.
because that happened all the time. And I'm at the Safeway and said, did the Senate Education Chair set this? And I probably, in a very dorky way, would always just remind people what the legislative process is all about. You know, and yes, we need you to come down and testify and send your comments in, but this is how the process works. And, you know, and so to me, that's what it always was. I'm still very, to this day, defensive of the legislature as a body. Because it's the way, it's our constitution, it's the process. And that's what I always used to do. And not everybody liked it, but it's like, that's the process. And it was a tough vote. It was, you know, it went down party lines, you're right. And it was ugly and tenacious, but this is how the body worked. And here are what your options moving forward. You can bring it back. You can send in comments. You can do these things to give them a way to feel like they can bring the issue back.
I love it. So for sake of time, I'm just kind of going to do a summarization. You tell me if I'm off base, or you can give me a silent thumbs up if you think I'm in the right direction. The reason I had you do individual is because it's very easy for me then to flip it to the board as the organization. So if you're an outsider looking at a board, I would assume that you would like a board who is resourceful, is doing instead of discussing, is unbiased, but at times will make difficult decisions in which each member may not agree with other members. However, we are respectful of each other and our viewpoints and experiences. We will see a board that is communicative to staff and vice versa, who is well prepared and asks questions for clarification or for additional knowledge. They'll also be very organized and will listen to each other. Was there something I missed or something that you feel very strongly about that should be added?
Can I just add to my earlier comment?
Sure.
In my experience, the average person on the street does not know how the process works. And so they usually really appreciate a background. So when I'm at the Safeway and I was working in the governor's office, and I can't believe the governor signed that bill. Like, well, I know it was controversial, but it was heard in the legislature for 5 months. It went through 4 committee, you know, and let them know that there was a process. They don't always know that and appreciate that. So there's some value in that. But to that, I want to ask a question. Do we have like a listserv that people can sign up for to get board updates if they're outsiders?
Yes.
It is, and you and I have discussed this even before I came on the board. If you're not a lobbyist, it's very hard to know what's happening down at the Capitol at large.
Yes. We have a
And
list.
so I think that's something for us to think about too, is when there is things that we think outside stakeholders besides just the usual lobbyists are of interest, how do we get that communicated to others who might be interested? Because that's the frustration, is that the average person is not when you're reading weekly legislative agendas. They're not checking state board, just they feel kind of caught off guard is what I usually see happens to that person in Safeway. They just heard about it on Fox 10 News or saw it on Twitter. And like, I didn't know. And then they get so mad that they didn't know. So finding a way for them to feel like they can be part of the process moving forward usually is helpful.
And I have one more thing. I know that all of us are like this. We want to fix everything. Okay, and there's some things we can't fix, especially through our words. So we have to watch what we say, especially when there are things out there with the public, because we are one body and we can't individually fix anything, but collectively we could try, or that's what we do. So I know with me, I hear a lot of things going on, and just like, a lot of comments. And you want to say certain things, saying that you can fix it, but I can't fix anything individually. I have to get with the board, and we collectively do it. So we have to really be careful. I know I do. I have to be careful to realize that I'm still part of a body that's working together to move forward. And if I start saying, I'll make sure this happens, then that's very dangerous. I have to say, let me go ahead and take it to the group, and we will talk about it. We will discuss it and see what we can do collectively. But when we start saying, doggone it, I'm going to fix that, and don't worry about it, I'll get that, and I'll make sure this happens, we really have to stay away from that. Okay. And sometimes that's what people are expecting us to say, instead of us saying, listen, I need to bring this back because I don't know the whole story, the whole perspective. And I think that when people know that we're going to listen, bring it back, talk about it, look at it, examine it, talk about it, and then move forward, instead of knee jerking or being emotional or having a mob mentality about anything, people will start to trust us, and we will start to become that constant in their lives, not moving with the wind or emotion, but standing for what is right, what is honorable, and what is best first for children and then for everyone else. When they know that even if we're not the most popular people in the world, we will be someone that they will come to because we're constant. Okay, and we're trustworthy. And that's something that we really have to work on, because if one of us do it, then it takes the strength away from the rest of the group. If one of us say, this is what I'm going to do, and I will make sure this happens, it will appear to the public that that person is attacking everybody else. Okay, and that weakens us as a body, right? So we really, when we're not together, we really need to keep each other in mind, because keeping each other in mind is keeping the state in mind, is keeping education in mind. So we just have to remember that. And I'm talking to myself too, because people are coming, and I want to say, this is how I feel. And it's not about how I feel. I need to know how everybody else feels too, because I can't see everything. I need to see the landscape before I open my mouth about anything. So the public will have to trust me to say, okay, let me look into this. Let me do a good study, a deep dive on this. So I hope that helps. But I know I'm talking to myself. Okay, I'm definitely talking to myself, because I'm a fixer. I want to fix everything. Okay, but I'm not the last word. We are the last word.
I love
The
that.
people are the
Yeah.
last word. So we
That's-
have to listen.
Thank you, Member Clay. That's great. So I have a lot of notes. I am going to ask to collect your pink papers so that I can see them. If you just kind of pass them all down to Member Clay. And then what we're going to do is, because we are missing 3 board members, and so I want to ensure that their voices are heard as well. I'm going to take these back. I'm going to have just some conversations with those board members to figure out where their thoughts are at. And then I'm looking to bring something back to the board, maybe October, December, to set something so that we know what the collective commitments are for the board, for the staff, et cetera. Sound good? Great. All right, moving into, thank you. Can you give me one of those? Thank you. All right. Moving into the next agenda item. I added this to the agenda on Wednesday evening.
Like a motion to reject Alicia's letter of resignation.
I think you could actually probably get enough votes for that based upon when I called people and told them.
Awkward after the conversation we just had about sound. Oh my God. Feels like a list of everything we want to make sure.
Well, yeah, I think it's important for the board to know things like, we liked that, Alicia gave us weekly emails, or Catcher answered his phone at 5 a.m. I hope no one's calling you at 5 a.m. Because those are the types of things I think that the board, as well as board staff, has worked on for the past 5 years. And so it's important that if this current board makeup still wants that level of communication and that level of respect and organization, then it's clearly communicated to the next person. And you still have me for 4 months, so. Okay, so now we're going to move into the discussion of the State Board of Education's role in the recruitment and selection of an executive director. Just a little background information. So I was hired in the fall of 2017. It was a very quick. You did it more than, I mean, I interviewed, you ran it. Yeah.
I think for the position, it was probably relatively quick.
Yeah. So what typically occurs is that today we will discuss what characteristics do you want in an executive director? And this is not, Alicia, you did such a great job. No, this is, do you want someone with a master's degree? Do you want someone with a master's of public administration, or do you want to get that specific? Do you want classroom experience, administrator experience? Do people would rather just have someone with policy experience? It's really what you think that person should be. Management experience, right? Our staff has grown significantly. Budgetary experience, that has grown significantly. That's the purpose for today, is to really have a conversation around who you see. Catcher passed out to you. It's a rough draft timeline of the hiring process. So from this conversation today, I'll go back and work with ADOA to update the position description, because it's changed significantly since I was hired. We'll also be assigned an ADOA recruiter. Don't know who that is yet. But basically that recruiter will sit with the board as well as the hiring committee and make sure that everything is done in accordance to the hiring practices of the state. At
Alicia,
this,
can I ask you,
Mhm.
you use the term recruiter, do they actually, is there active recruitment or soliciting applications, or are they just kind of walking us through making sure we stay in state guidelines of hiring procedures?
So in 17, it was more stay within the guidelines posted on the jobs website, whatnot. I don't know how ADOA is doing this type of recruitment now, because I do know the state has like LinkedIn accounts.
Okay,
So I don't
okay.
know how that recruitment has grown
Okay.
in what is considered the E-level positions.
Got it.
They will help with like pay, salary schedules, whatnot, help with the development of the PD, the job description. At the September board meeting, the board president will establish a hiring committee. When I was hired, it was, there's no definition of what the hiring committee is. It's really of who's interested in serving on that hiring committee. And really thinking about what you bring to the table in that conversation and determination. Previously, it was the vice president of the board who then was becoming president. So that's why he was part of it. Jared Taylor was on that hiring committee. Superintendent Diane Douglas was on that hiring committee. Patricia Wellborn, Calvin Baker. So that was a good mix of district, charter, business, partnerships with the department. And then it had the board leadership aspect to it too. So that hiring committee will be established at the September board meeting. The board will also vote on the position description and vote on a timeline, which will be relatively similar to what's in front of you. I would suggest that the board post the job job position by October 3rd. And then let it run for 2 weeks. While that's running, the hiring committee is meeting and discussing what type of interview process do we want? What type of questions do we want to ask? Whatnot, doing all of the behind the scenes work to get ready for interviews. I would also recommend that after 2 weeks, you do a first pool of applications. The hiring committee then meets, discusses those applications, and then basically you review them. And then you come back as a group and you say, okay, this is, I liked this person. Let's discuss this person, that person, whatnot. I would then recommend pulling a second time, just so that if there's someone who is great and just waited a while, I personally waited to like the last minute to apply because I didn't want the job. Look at me now. So
Yeah, exactly.
I would also suggest starting your first round of interviews sometime in like early to mid-November. And because I'm saying early to mid, it's because as we're going through this process, we're also going to be going through accountability and the Accountability Appeals Committee. So the Accountability Appeals Committee is a body of 3 board members. So I want to be cognizant of people's time and scheduling and whatnot. And then we do have some conferences within the fall that like I'm presenting at that I need to be there and whatnot. Depending on how the hiring committee structures their interviews, you could do in-person phone calls, you can do in-basket like task type projects, which I did. And the hiring committee will meet to discuss each of those steps. Ultimately, you would be having in-person interviews. I think some of the other meetings with the hiring committee, such as the planning and whatnot, can be virtual. And then if anyone is interested in being on the hiring committee that's from out of Greater Phoenix, then, we could get like hotels and back up the interviews for like a Monday, Tuesday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so that we're not traveling. The goal is to have the State Board of Education hire an executive director at the December board meeting, which is early in December. I believe it's the second week. That would allow for 4 weeks between the board formally taking action and my last day, which would provide time for the new person to meet with members, to meet with staff, to have conversations with me, with board leadership, get to know people and sort of like, I'm going to use you as an example, like, hey, this is the new ED, that type of relationship building. That wasn't necessarily available to me when I came in, and I found that to be very difficult. My personal goal is to ensure that there's a very clear transition plan, as well as having the January board meeting almost completely done so that a new person doesn't even have to worry about that. So that's the quick timeline. Questions pertaining to the document that's in front of you that I quickly conversed about?
Yeah, just a couple of quick, thank you for that, Alicia. So I'm hearing the interview protocols are relatively flexible, meaning if hypothetically 3 candidates floated to the top pretty clearly, and then we did in-person interviews right away, and one person clearly was the choice of the group, we're done. Otherwise, if there's like 8 that seem possible, all this hypothetical, we might do a quick round of virtual interviews to get to 3 in person. All of that is not necessarily prescribed by the state. Am I hearing you correct?
That's correct. So would it be beneficial to know what I went through?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I believe there were 7 people?
Probably at least.
And I believe the hiring committee had a larger they had a larger number that went through a phone initial screener with ADOA. And then those responses came back to the hiring committee. The hiring committee determined out of those which ones they're going to invite in for a formal interview.
Okay.
And there was about 7. And then after that, did all 7 get the task?
I think all 7 got the task, and I think the hiring committee, which is the public body, by the way.
Mhm.
Tell me what
however,
that means. Open?
it-
It's
it is-
subject to open meeting law?
It is, yes, but it's also matters discussing personnel, so it's stuff.
Got
that The
it.
hiring
Okay.
committee can
Okay.
go into, and the hiring committee for the last process went into executive session every time, but they don't have to. And in fact, during some of the processes, the candidates being discussed can elect to have those discussions happen in open meeting. They have a right to request that those discussions happen in open. So what that means for presumably Alicia, who's staffing that, is that we'll have to post all of those, we have to follow open meeting law. So we'll have to post all those hiring committee dates at least 24 hours in advance for the agendas. She'll have to send notices to those people that they're being discussed and that they have a right to elect to have that discussion in open meeting. I think the hiring committee, ADOA, the recruiter, I don't mean to besmirch ADOA, but they're essentially just collecting the applications, and then they look for the minimum qualification. So if the board puts a minimum qualification of a bachelor's degree and somebody applies without one, they won't even forward that to the board. They'll just call that out. And then they'll send that to the staff, who will give that to the hiring committee. The hiring committee on the last one, I think individually sort of graded. I don't know if they did a number system or a letter system. I can't remember, but they individually graded the applicants, and then they came back together and they kind of compared notes and normed, like, well, why did you give them a 4 when I gave them a 3 or what have you? And then based on those grades, that's how they decided if they were going to go into interviews or not. And then they gave them the tasks, and then just the tasks, and so on.
So the public nature of this process then precludes someone from applying, but doesn't want their employer to know just yet, wants it kind of, there's not,
We don't.
we often do that
post-
in higher ed, where unless you're a named finalist, you can go through anonymously for the first couple rounds.
Yeah,
Not the case here, it sounds like.
No, I think you'll be anonymous because we won't be posting the names publicly. I think you're anonymous up until like the board's making the vote.
Oh, okay.
To to hire. Unless that person elects to have some of those discussions in public, in which case that would be their choice to have their name publicly out there beforehand, but that wouldn't automatically lead to others being out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
you do such a good job of explaining my
Well, I had, yeah,
mess of a brain.
no.
That in the requirement qualifications, somebody.
Yes, someone who can like translate this. Uh-huh.
Well, Alicia, yeah, well, to be fair to Alicia, I had the advantage of staffing that committee after I had been on the board for a few months. Because at the time, Executive Director Schmidt had gone out of the country for a little while, so somebody had to staff that committee. So it was me. Yeah.
So
Questions?
I just have a thought. So when I left my recent job, I got to, supervise that hiring process. And I hadn't done something like that in a long time. So my thought is, one of the things I noticed, and it was kind of a similar position, it was like a senior policy director type thing. In those first 2 weeks, the applications you're going to get are the people who are looking for a job. Like their resume is done. They know they want to leave their job for whatever reason or go there. And which is great. But it takes a while to get the people like Alicia who may not be looking for a job, but you think might be really good, because I'm assuming a lot of us are going to start talking about it on social media to encourage people. So I would just think about that timing, because like I said, sometimes it takes a while for people to go, do I really want that? And they're going to call some people and some other friends of, do I want that job? And then get their resume together. So just think about that timing, because it takes a little bit longer to get that kind of second batch of people through.
Alicia, is the board, would they be beholden to, if they voted on a 2-week window or a 3-week window and didn't get the amount of applications that they wanted,
No,
would they be beholden to that,
No.
or they could reopen it?
they,
Okay,
yeah, so let's say like,
I'm looking at Melissa too, because she helps with.
because Melissa always knows, Melissa does a lot of our internal staff hiring. So if like, let's say you say, I say, I don't like any of these people, we can go to our recruiter and reopen it.
Open until filled.
But the,
And it may not be this that you don't mean. I still had lots of people I liked that first batch, but you know, friends were calling me going, hey, I know somebody really great. I'm trying to get them to apply. And that's that group that sometimes takes a little bit longer. And there might be someone really good in that group.
Yeah. Love it. Okay, so what are some characteristics that you believe should be in the executive director role? Or do you have questions or want to, ask me anything?
I think one thing for sure, and I think it's probably already on there and we would all agree, is someone who is just excellent at managing people and working with people, both from a state board perspective because of all the different challenges of working with all of our different personalities. But it's just very, very important to me that whoever is in that role is knows how to manage all of these new staff and are coming from a place of experience. And I don't know if there's letters or recommendations, but just that they've been in other positions where they've been well respected for their leadership. I know sometimes it's easy to go, we want someone who has a great policy background. We want someone who's an attorney. We want someone who's, none of that matters to me as someone who is going to be able to lead the staff well.
Okay, so putting on like HR hat, is that a qualification of previous staff management?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so managing a staff, you also said something about boards. Does the individual need to have experience with boards?
I personally don't think so, because I think you can find really high quality people that are outside of government that have done a great job and can exemplify that. And I think we always in government should be looking for people like that we can bring in. But that should.
Are you asking, Alicia, like, does the person have to have an experience in state government managing a board?
Well, like you have a bunch of board experience. You have nonprofit board experience, local governing board experience.
I don't think somebody needs to have board experience, but I think project management, people management.
So people management, project management.
To Jenny's comment, which I echo, even though Catcher is the face of us to definitely at the legislature and to a lot of the external stakeholders, still has to be somebody very personable that outside policymakers will respect.
And just so you all know, this, the relationship between the deputy director and myself, Catcher and I, has evolved. So early on, yes, early on,
Now she despises it.
now I'm like, lose my left arm.
Everyone turned on me for Catcher. I know where I stand.
I feel my strength in this role has been working with the practitioners, right? And understanding how policy impacts practice. His strength is electeds and the legislator and different groups and being like the policy wonk. Like I can speak about policy till I'm blue in my face, but it's also, I enjoy that collaboration and the meeting people and providing the respectful conversations or being personable, right? Like that's my strength. I have that Arizona K-12 background. His background is policy and the ledge, right? So it's worked well for us. It could be different. You could have someone who's like Member Kavicka said personable, but maybe has a policy background, right? So then a conversation the board could have with that individual at some point is like, okay, well, how are you going to gain the field experience? How are you going to build up those relationships with the different groups and organizations type thing? What about background? What do you believe an individual should have? Or what do you believe an individual could learn?
I personally do think it's important for the person to have school leadership experience. So whether as a principal or district or charter admin experience, because a lot of the policies we're working on have huge impacts on our schools. And so for someone to have, if they came outside of education, I just think the learning curve would actually really slow down the work of the board. And there would be such a steep learning curve, especially when our big, like a lot of the big things we work on are like assessment, accountability, and educator certification and misconduct, and those really big buckets that I even think people coming from university experience, just like education leadership experience is important.
Alicia, is it true that the way the DOA structures it, it's been a while since I've looked at it, that there's like the background qualifications that the non-negotiable, like a bachelor's degree, and then there's the things that are the desired things. So
You can put those degrees under desired as
there's
well.
some things I'm thinking about, but I don't think they need to be like must-haves.
Well, and they don't,
Desired
Mhm.
qualifications.
you can share those.
School, like someone who can navigate the K-12 landscape. I mean, because a lot of what, and I've been hesitating to comment too much because I have been realizing this, when we did the budget presentation, how dramatically the staff has changed in size and scope since I was down here 10 years ago. So I'm trying to keep that in my mind, but a lot of what you guys do is navigate ADE, all the different staff and all the different issues and gather that. So to not know any of that would slow down the work. I don't know if that's a must-have, but I think it's a desired. But those are.
Well, and two, Member Kravickas, when you speak about navigating the K-12 landscape, maybe the Arizona K-12 landscape, looking at school leadership, but then also as the board has kind of changed within policy, right? Now we write the rules for the ESA program. We had open enrollment policy in the fall of last year. So it's almost like education across the board. And I would anticipate that there's probably going to be areas of weakness, right? So for me, I don't have district level, business level experience, right? And so I remember this at the time, Member Baker, Cal Baker pulled me aside and he said, look, he's like, this is going to be your blind spot. Please host superintendent meetings once a month so that you get that organizational level impact. And I think that was actually a great suggestion. Obviously, I implemented it. But it also provided me personally an opportunity to listen. And we spoke about listening as like the board commitments, because I didn't come to the superintendents and say, I'm the Board of Education, you need to do this, you need to do that. It was, hey, the board's thinking of this, help me understand how it would impact you at an organizational level, because I don't have that knowledge. And they were more than willing to give me some input, and then I could go back to the board and share what I had learned. So it's okay if someone is missing something, it'll just be up to the board to kind of guide them into how they can learn more.
Alicia, I think that's a great point, and we just have to resist the urge to write a job description that only a unicorn,
That is very
can
specific.
fit into, right? So someone who has strong administrative acumen and has been a school leader and has policy experience and is personable and can do ledge stuff. And and then we want all of that, right? But that's the unicorn. So,
Well, and also President Corey brought up a good point with like policy experience, right? People who work in schools have policy experience, but their experience is in the implementation of that policy, right? So it's also helping them understand that they do have that experience. They just have a different lens in which they focus on it, right? And that is also powerful when the board talks about policy, because you can have someone on staff who is able to identify implementation errors or holes within that policy and provide recommendations on how to address those holes, right? But yes, unicorns just don't exist.
and then just the exercise we did just previous to this, right? So if we find that unicorn, but if they can't work with the department and communicate, then we're no better off, right? So again, it's all those softs. Yeah, we're probably worse off. The soft skills, if that's the right word that we talked about earlier, you know, the communication skills, the ability to seek compromise, all those things that we talked about. So tougher to put in the job description, even tougher to quantify, but it's.
To the interview.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Speaking of not doing a unicorn, I'd caution us to not just say Arizona education experience, because there's people from other states that have that not only have that experience, but also have a wider perspective of how things are working in other states that can bring in good ideas. Lots of people want to move to Arizona.
Okay.
Do you have what you need from us, Alicia?
I mean, I think so. I think it's some good basic level for the PD. And then I think some of the more soft skills type things can be brought out within the hiring committee and the types of questions that they ask, and the types of tasks they wish to have the applicants perform. Does anyone, before we break for a break? We have about 8 more minutes. Does anyone have any like organizational type questions that you want to be aware of from me, from an agency level?
Do you have, Alicia, do you have a job description for yourself?
I do have a job description for myself, but it's significantly out of date. Hence, I didn't bring it because it would have been would have been a waste of time.
It'd be interesting just to have what previously was required, and then we add in all the other roles and responsibilities, like managing a staff of 23 people, managing a budget of 3.3 million, you know, we can at least know what we worked or what the board worked from before. And then if there are any policies or procedures or things that Arizona Department of Administration, like if they have like a list of requirements or different things that we can have as we take that into consideration, that would be helpful too.
I think that's really a great idea, because I'm thinking like one of the things is like if you're on the hiring committee or even like the board, right, you make the final action. If you know someone who's interviewing, I mean, I would be very cautious of having those types of conversations, because you never want to say that the agency was discriminatory towards an applicant and whatnot.
Yeah.
Great
So
idea.
any of that, it's just
Okay.
so we know ourselves. Like I've been part of hiring committees in the past, but they have not been at any government agency type thing. So there is a level of bureaucracy and checking of I's or dotting I's and crossing T's that I think we collectively might need, that is different than hiring an executive or a nonprofit role. That would be helpful. And then you can decide, or we can decide who wants to sign up for navigating that.
Well, I mean, that's a good point. We will need folks to, you know, I'd love to gauge your interest in serving on the hiring committee. So maybe I'm hearing you say, knowing what that will entail. This is kind of a timeline, but what are the nuances of it before
That'd be
you
helpful.
say yes or no. Okay.
I mean, I might say yes, and then I read and like, no.
That's fair.
Backtrack.
So what I'll do is I'll work on getting
Very
those
savvy there. Yeah, you want to know the rules before you play the game. huh?
Exactly.
live dangerously. I'll create a document with like the guardrails. I'll speak with our HR individual and then probably get that out maybe next week before I go home. So
And I had one final quick question. So you're gonna show us the old job description, add in kind of all the new stuff that you're actually doing. Has there ever been in the past and would it be appropriate now for you to gather feedback from current staff?
So that was one of the things I was planning on doing is trying to figure out how to send them like an anonymous survey. So they could, I think I have a really good sense of what certain aspects of the staff need and want, right? Because when the investigative unit came over, it was for a while very bifurcated because you had the investigative unit had been working and they had established climate and culture and relationships and what, and then you had like the policy side, right? So it was, I tried to be very cognizant of like changing my vernacular to ensure like the state board staff no longer just means be sick, is the state board staff, right? So when you look at educator misconduct, it is a massive program responsibility and authority of the State Board of Education, but it's also very niche and there is policy overlap. And I think an individual could understand enough of the policy aspect of it and put trust in the great staffers who are implementing that policy and implementing those investigations and providing recommendations to the board. But again, there's that trust aspect that needs to be there. I don't pretend to know how to do an investigation because I don't,
And I'm just thinking like keeping it to a perspective of like, here's the one or two things and a staff member's thinking in their mind, these are the things that worked really well with this particular executive director. And so them having that opportunity
Mhm.
to put down one or two things that they would like to see or that worked well. And, the other stuff, okay, fine, we don't need to hear about any of that stuff, but what they were looking for, because I think that's important for the board to hear that this is what the staff values too.
Great. Love it. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I will get to work on updating my PD, the position PD. And like I stated, we'll do some more stuff in September and October. And we'll have a really nice transition plan that all of you will see and have, parts of so that you know what to expect in certain months. And then a lot of the conversations we've had pertaining to like the EPP conversation yesterday, I think can also be built into that transition plan so that there are some projects and some topics that a new executive director can kind of like hit the ground running and be successful. So thank you for that. It is 10:28, so why don't we just break for that break and we'll come back around 10:45. We'll have a legislative discussion. Ketcher will run us through implementation of the 2022 session. We'll talk about the legislative team of the State Board of Ed, and then kind of talk about what our 2023 ledge priorities could be. Great. Thank you.
point as we talk about legislative implementation from 2022 and take a look forward to 2023. So Executive Director Williams, is it going to be Deputy Director Baden who kind of leads us through this? Ketcher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Corr, Vice President Burton, and members. So we will first start with an update on how the implementation of legislation passed this last session is going. We sent out after session ended sort of the implementation map, if you will, of that legislation. Usually session ends in a time frame when we are able to have a board meeting pretty soon after that, and the board can provide input on if they'd like to see things moved around or shuffled. We didn't have that this time because session ended when it did. So we figured before jumping into potential priorities for next session, we just sort of update you on where we're at from last year, and you can chime in. I'll try not to spend too much time on it, but I also sometimes get lost talking about a bunch of bills and all the insider stuff that I find very interesting, but I lose the big picture on. So we'll start with the stuff that's already done, which is just a nice way to get things rolling here. And as a reminder, the effective date is September 24th. So we did a couple of these things earlier than we had to, but that's okay in some cases, but not all. And this slide deck's also on Simbly, by the way. The first up was a bill around public records requests. We just had to provide some contact information on who would be receiving those public records requests. That wasn't a bill specific to our agency. That was a statewide agency bill. And also to acknowledge receipt within 5 business days. As it so happens, we already did that. So that was just updating some SOPs in the website, nothing too crazy, and we got that done. The second was a bill on rulemaking procedures. So just as a reminder, this board is exempt from many rulemaking procedures that other agencies are subject to. So a lot of other agencies, when they go through rulemaking procedures, have to go through the Governor's Regulatory Review Council, which is several extra layers of bureaucracy and steps to ensure that we are within our statutory authority and that there's sufficient public comment and that there isn't a fiscal impact and et cetera and so forth. Our agency, along with the Charter Board and a couple others for very specific items, are exempt from that Governor's Regulatory Review Council process. Part of that, and that hasn't gone back forever. That actually, I think Vince Yanez was the executive director when that exemption came into place. Part of the rationale was because the board is often charged with doing rulemaking that needs to become effective pretty soon because of the subsequent school year. But that doesn't mean that we have incumbent on ourselves placed upon ourselves some rulemaking processes to ensure that we're still being transparent and deliberate, because the legislature can take away that exemption whenever they so choose. This bill is specific to codifying an executive order that had been in place since Governor Brewer, a rulemaking moratorium. It had made some other changes too. They kind of smashed together that concept with some other things that were happening. For our purposes, it's the rulemaking moratorium. So really what that means for this board is that before we open rulemaking procedures, we have to do a mother may I with the governor's office. We submit a request for opening up those rulemaking procedures. And under certain circumstances, we also have to identify rules that could be repealed because they're redundant or antiquated or what have you. The way that we have, I had mentioned that this has already been completed because we've updated the SOP. We envision this being a process that staff would handle before the board votes to open rulemaking procedures. The language is that before an agency engages in rulemaking, which we're taking to mean before we open the rulemaking procedures, we would submit that request. And we're envisioning staff would do that at least 2 weeks before the board meeting to ensure we can get a response in time. We're having some conversations with the governor's office if they have a format they prefer or a different timeline or who would receive that. But we think that probably makes the most sense, especially because this is codifying an executive order, and most of those up to this point anyways could change with a new governor, have been sort of pro forma sort of processes. So those are those two that are already done. The rest are not done. They are in progress. So you heard a lot about positions to fill. These are also things that'll be handled administratively by the executive director and by Melissa on filling those positions. Don't require board votes, haven't done those historically. Hopefully we can get those knocked out here in the next few months. The assistant attorney generals, there was some money to hire assistant attorney generals. Those aren't people that our agency hire. It's actually just funding an agreement that we have with the attorney general's office, who's the one who hires them. I think in the past, there's been some courtesy to allow us to review those applicants if they're going to be doing a lot of work with us. Next up are some bills that are in progress that we've labeled higher priority, and that's not necessarily because we think they're better policies or worse policies. This is just trying to capture staff's capacity, the deadlines that are in the bills, and the resources available to get them done. First up is adult education. There were 3 separate bills passed with 3 separate programs for adult education, one for community colleges, one that was run by Goodwill, where that organization or any organization can partner with a school, and then one run by Grad Alliance, which is sort of a regional diploma organization for adult ed. Those 3 all have slightly different, well, sometimes slightly, sometimes more significant differences in their programs, in their funding. But what they all 3 share is that we share some oversight responsibility with the Department of Education. So you'll see in September that we'll be approving the application formats for how entities apply for those 3 programs. ADE's been working on that and keeping us in the loop. And then those will hit the streets. People will apply, and then this board will approve those applicants, because our priority right now is getting those out the door, getting the applicants approved, and getting dollars flowing to them so they can start educating those students, because there are some deadlines in the bills we have to try to meet. Longer term, the board will be charged with coming up with performance expectations for those programs, which will be a more significant task, because those programs, similar to our alt ed A to F discussions, it can be very difficult in terms of data capturing and what is a quality program, certainly getting credentials and diplomas, but other things like that. Next up, you already saw the first bullet point, so we can file that under completed. I didn't want to assume the board would approve that, so we kept it under in progress until here. Next up is around seizure management plans. The board has to approve trainings for educators and school nurses to get trained on how to manage seizures in schools. This is somewhat similar to, we already have laws and rules on the books around EpiPen administration in schools and inhaler administration in schools. This is sort of similar to that. So you'll see some action items probably in September. Right here we have October, but try to knock some stuff out that we feel like we can as soon as we can. And then there's some other details there on the slide that I won't go into too much detail on. Yes.
Sorry, Catcher. I do have a question about the 9/11 instruction,
Oh,
and
yes.
we did approve it, but I was wondering if is it categorized by grade, like K4, 5A, high school? Because what we approved was a list, and I understand all that, and the good stuff on there, but I was just wondering, when a school or a teacher looks at that list, is it categorized?
Some of it was, I think the book list had some recommended age bands, grade bands. Some of the other resources, I don't believe specifically laid that out. Some of them might have when you clicked on them. But we can work with the Department of Ed. We had some conversations too. The Department of Ed is open to shrinking that list as the board sees fit, expanding that list as the board sees fit, and the board can revisit that in future years too. And that's one where, we did that before the effective date, because 9/11 will be before the effective date and before our next board meeting. So we thought it was prudent, and those resources were already there. But we can work on that.
I
if
just think
that's
it'd be a
something you'd
good
like to see.
idea for someone, and even, just anybody who wants access to that material, even if they're homeschooling or, I just think that just the categorization would be helpful. So thank you.
Got it. Next up, as we continue scrolling on down, we have three other here that the deadline here is end of 2022. I guess I will caution the ESA rulemaking that has to conform to the universal expansion. Depending on the scope of what the board would like to do, that might bleed into January. If it's just conforming rule changes, it's probably something that can be knocked out till December. Early literacy is very much the same way. There's some conforming changes that need to be made in rule. However, we have had some discussions at previous board meetings about whether or not that should encompass some other items, in which case that might need to take longer than December. Civic standards and resources. We have a meeting on September 7th, I believe. This is a bill that requires the board to update its social studies standards around civics, and then also to adopt oral history resources that demonstrate portraits in patriotism. That's a bill that was copied largely from Florida. We have a meeting on September 7th to talk to the Sandra Day O'Connor Institute, the Freedom Schools, both here and at ASU, to see what because I know they already have some stuff, but to see what they have that they can work with us on to recommend, and also to see if there's something else we can work on that could be helpful to adopt to meet that requirement. Updating the civic standards was amended in a way that we don't have to do that until we open those standards up again for review. And that was important because those standards were just approved just a few years ago and were only implemented, I think, last year or the year before. So that's that. I'm sorry, remember Haley.
On that, are you all talking to organizations like Victims of Communism Foundation? I know that Congressman Nguyen had a very specific element around issues around communism and making sure you talk to help educate around totalitarian governments.
Yep. Yeah. Member Haley. Absolutely. We had a meeting with them on with the governor's office a couple of weeks ago, I believe. And we invited them to that larger meeting on September 7th as well.
And will Dr. Critchlow or anybody else from the history, like Skettle or others there's a new center at ASU that focuses on things like this as well. Will they be invited?
Member Haley, I don't think I invited them. I invited Dr. Carice. And then I kind of deferred also to ASU's policy team if there were other people they'd like invited, but maybe
I can send you some names, maybe.
Please. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
And are we allowed to attend that meeting on the 7th?
Yeah.
Also?
Yep.
Okay.
And I can send members it's a virtual meeting, partially because the size of the meeting and we don't have our office space anymore. I couldn't find a room that could hold us in the shared workspace. But yes, I'll know because it's a virtual meeting how many of you are attending. So that way I can make sure we get a quorum that we notice. But yeah, you can. Okay, we can move on down. I take a note. Educator certification, again, end of this calendar year. We have some conforming changes to Senate Bill to make to rule for Senate Bill 1159. That draft of that rule is going to the Certification Advisory Committee on September 6th. It is largely conforming rule changes. However, as often happens with certification, whenever we open up certification rules, there's oftentimes something that we found that hasn't been updated. And so in this case, we have interim administrative certificates that need to be updated and other certificates that have antiquated requirements. So some of that rule package will look a little daunting. A lot of it's just kind of moving stuff around to make more sense of it. House Bill 2179 is around accounting responsibility. The county's treasurers and superintendents ran this bill. We just have to update our SOPs with our agency, ADE, and Auditor General's office to make sure we're all collaborating and making sure that the county is involved in those applications prior to approval. And then open enrollment. In January, as Alicia had mentioned earlier, I think yesterday, the board is charged under statute subject to available appropriation, and we got that appropriation in that FTE to have a public awareness effort around open enrollment. And so hopefully we can get that FTE on board. I think in terms of setting expectations, by the time we get that FTE on board and January rolls around, that public awareness effort might be a little more pared down compared to future years. I think we can build that out in future years, but initially it might be some more tools for parents. And then in future years, we can start building out and making that a little more robust. There is that funding for that position was $150,000. So the legislature did not specify necessarily how that would be spent, but they gave us $150,000 on one FTE, which seems to us that it is probably not just intended to pay for that one position, because that would be a pretty highly paid position even after ERE is included. So the board has some room there probably to take advantage of that funding to get a little creative. And I think that's kind of what the governor's office and the legislature were hoping for. I just, in terms of the timing of when the budget was adopted and when we can get this person on board, it's probably not realistic to expect that to happen in January, this coming January, but future, I think that's the year after that is probably a good target. I think that about captures it. Didn't want to spend too much time on these bills. So that means unless there's any questions on any of that, or if you'd like to see anything moved around or shuffled around, again, these are kind of soft deadlines. Some of them are harder deadlines, but many of them are kind of softer.
More slide, right?
Do we have one more slide, Jessica? Oh, yeah, we do. Well, we got to make sure we do this stuff too. Sorry about that. The civics test, the requirement, the cut score to graduate from high school on the civics test was increased. So we got to do conforming rules. That's happening whether we do the conforming rules or not. So that's why it's early 2023 when we're trying to prioritize things to get done. Some of this stuff, we figured we can wait. You might also though just see this in September if I have time, because we don't really have to vet that too widely. And if it's conforming rules, it could be something we knock out. But it might be something that we wait just because we have higher priorities. The way that there is a technical fix that needs to happen in those rules as well that we'll make. The way they implemented that after talking to us a little bit about it is that it'll apply to the incoming freshmen. I think the incoming freshmen. So students who already took it and passed it under the old cut score aren't going to be required to go back and take it again. Part of that is because just the way that test is structured is that it's not a standardized statewide assessment where all the scores are categorized and assigned to a student. It's much more informal. So it would have been kind of a task for schools to have to go back and figure out what they scored on those previous assessments. School district procurement got to make some changes. There was a bill that was introduced a few years in a row that finally got over the finish line around subcontractors getting paid on public works contracts. That makes it sound like I know a lot about the issue, but I really don't. Procurement's really tough. And we have pages, dozens and dozens and dozens of pages of school district procurement rules that we'll have to make conforming changes to. And that's a pretty laborious process because we have to bring in the Auditor General's office, the AG's office, district procurement people, and then the Auditor General does a formal review of those rules. If you'd like my personal take on the school district procurement rules, it's frankly that this board, with no offense to this board or to myself, isn't necessarily suited to have those rules because we are not necessarily school district procurement experts. And those rules in a lot of cases still track pretty closely to ADOA's procurement rules. I think the legislature envisioned that there might be significant differences in how school district procure compared to state agencies, that our board would need have some special expertise on it. I don't know if that's really borne out over the last couple of years, but that's just my personal take on it. And because it's a bear. And then lastly, certification fees, we have some conforming changes. There was an expansion of waiving licensure fees across state agencies. So we have to make some conforming changes to certification rules. We also will probably, I was actually talking to Lou about this a little bit. We might need to make some clarifications because there's maybe an open question, though I think it's probably pretty settled, about if that initial licensure would include initial applications for endorsements as well as for certification. I think it's pretty clear the intent would say that that's a yes, because it's trying to alleviate the burden of fees for people who are below a certain income threshold. So that might be something the board might need to clarify in the rules, and the department might seek that clarification, in addition to some requirements that the legislation is silent on, but makes sense, like that people have to provide documentation that they meet, one of those eligibility criteria. That now is the end of implementation updates.
It's kind of like an encore.
Yes.
Crowd just brings the performer back on.
Well, and often, yes. Hopefully I don't find any legislation that passed this last year that I missed, and then I come back to the board and say, well, we have some other things. And usually it's very state government-y kind of things that if it falls through the cracks.
Any questions on the look back before we pivot to the look forward? Yeah, Carla.
I have a technical question and a request, just for my own curiosity. I did see all those bills about the adult diploma programs. Didn't statute already allow for all that to happen, or why were those bills needed?
So ADE does have an adult ed program that's funded both federally and through WIOA, I think. And I think in the past, maybe the governor's office has thrown some WIOA money at them too. I don't believe that was a statutory program though. And this was sort of a confluence of those three separate groups or entities kind of advocating for some additional adult ed funds. Goodwill's been advocating for several years. Grad Alliance, which is also a dropout recovery program, though they don't currently operate in the state. I think they got some federal dollars from the governor's office for some dropout recovery program activities. So I don't think there was, I guess there was an existing structure that funded adult ed through ADE, but they wanted some specific and separate statutory programmatic structures for that.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate my desire to get some of the items from the Move On When Reading recommendation report last year into the early literacy rulemaking process.
Got it. Okay, we'll move on to the next sub item there for approving legislative priorities for the upcoming session. Real quick on sort of the process and what this item could be and what it doesn't have to be. Just for everybody to know that this is sort of the time for the board to outline what it would like to start exploring for priorities for the 2023 session. So you don't have to feel like you have a fully fleshed out idea right now. And that the board has to vote on it now and that you're forever beholden to it. That's not necessarily what we need to do right now. You can throw out some ideas, and I will give Member Haley as an example. Earlier yesterday, we talked about, maybe the board needs to explore additional transparency and data for educator prep programs, and maybe that's legislation. Based on that discussion, I would probably recommend making that a priority for right now. And what we'll do as staff is we'll take that back, review if that does need a statutory change or not. If not, maybe that's something we can do in rule or through board action or just talking informally with the EPPs or ADE. If it does need legislative action, then maybe we'll start putting out some initial feelers on how that could happen, if it's viable, and maybe even have a draft ready over the next couple meetings. And then the board could formally approve that bill draft or the concept and move forward from there. So if you have ideas, but they're not fully fleshed out, that's okay. We can throw them out here and we can start exploring them. If you do have very specific ideas, now is also the time. This is also, the board has its mission statement. We have our goals. These are the priorities of what we'd like to tackle in the legislative session. This is not necessarily a time where we have to figure out the strategy or the tactics. That's the legislative team, which is made up of board leadership, does a lot of the strategic stuff around session. And then, of course, board staff at the direction of the legislative team does a lot of the day-to-day tactics of, are we meeting with this member? Are we calling them? Are we taking a strong stance, or are we going in soft? Are we, all those sorts of day-to-day things. So you don't have to, the board can certainly, decide if it wants to play a more active role in those things. That does slow some things down. That's just not how we've done it over the last few years. But that is something the board could decide to do. So I will stop talking with just the understanding that on my list already, I have Member Haley's EPP concept and the board's EPP concept, and we'll start putting that through the ringer and seeing what comes out. But anything else that the board wants to talk about, whether it came up over the last day, it doesn't have to have come up over the last day and a half. If it's something that you've been ruminating on, now is also the time to jump in on that.
Catcher, the two things I wanted to put on our radar for further discussion would be under special education, and specifically regarding dyslexia and autism. And we can have further conversation on this since it's just the very initial piece, and I'm going to defer to Carla on the second half of this too. But I started to bring up the question, you guys might have noticed when we had the presentation the other day, because I don't think that most people are aware, I certainly wasn't when I went through the process, that while we are doing all of this incredible screening for dyslexia in our state, that actually no children are actually getting a diagnosis of dyslexia if the family wants it. And that's a significant problem because the only way to do that is to get a private neuropsychological evaluation, which is around $2,500. And so considering that we know 1 in 5 children are dyslexic, I think that screening is very exciting and so necessary. And I'm glad we've moved in that direction. So I'd love for us to start just looking at what does it look like to actually help families actually not just get screened, but actually get a diagnosis for dyslexia. And is there any role that we can have in that or not? And then on the autism piece, I'm going to defer that to Carla. Do you want me to defer that to you, Carla, or do you want me to share the concern I had on the autism piece?
Go ahead, I'll
Okay,
follow on.
perfect. So one of the other things that I've learned a lot in my work, and then also meeting with various stakeholders, special education attorneys, and in my private work, is that families in our state and all over receive private diagnoses of autism, and that can be received from a medical doctor or from a neuropsychologist, and it's usually done at parent expense. But you can also get state insurance also covers those evaluations. But a private diagnosis of autism does not actually mean that a school will recognize autism on their special education paperwork, which is a very significant problem and challenge. There is a testing and approving that the child's autism actually has to be impacting their education. And so parents are not experts in that. So they, to have that challenge of knowing like, wait a second, I have this private diagnosis. Like, what do you mean it's not impacting their education? Which means that the child then doesn't receive services. And so I think that's just a conversation that could be had. I'm not sure if there's legislative pieces related to it, and anything I said that was wrong on that issue, I'm deferring to Carla. Carla, member Kavickas, excuse me.
Thank you. I can't reiterate enough how big this issue is, and it's become aware to me in the past 3 months, how many emails I'm getting from parents. I've been reaching out to a variety of special education attorneys, and they all agree it's one of the top issues they're getting. Raising special kids says they get a couple calls a day on this. But I think the broader issue isn't just dyslexia or autism. It says that we as a state have provided little to, and I've, of course, because I'm a nerd that way, I've already read our statutes and our rules on this, and I've started to look at other states. We don't really provide much guidance. And there is a very tricky road to walk between federal law, because federal law, it's very individualized and there's things there. But I have seen examples of other states that have put guidance manuals, procedures in statute and mostly in state board rule to just provide more guidance. Because I'll tell you the reason I'm so passionate about this issue is because the only parents that are getting the services for the kids are the ones who can afford an attorney and advocate. And that's what's wrong. This is an equity issue. I respect local control and I respect the IEP process, but it shouldn't only be the parents who can afford outside support that get the services for their kids. I've started to do some research. I think it's a great topic maybe for a subcommittee, maybe Colorado did a task force, maybe using the C app. There's lots of different ways I think we can do it. May not need to be legislative, although I will tell you the definition in statute is, I'm learning this DSM-3, which is now we're on DSM-5. So there's like some things we probably could do. I'm still kind of digging into what other states are doing because, like, as I've said, I always like to see other examples. I think there's more that we could do to provide guidance and transparency for parents, regardless of what the issue is, whether it's dyslexia or autism. There may be unique nuances for each that we want to address. I think that's the broader one. The other one I wanted to raise, if that's okay. I know the Helios Foundation is getting ready to release a really big dual enrollment report. And I just put this on the table. There may be something that the state board can do. I recently did a 50 state scan on dual enrollment for work, especially in regards to students with disabilities. And so I saw a lot of examples of states who are using state board rule to put more flesh on it on the K-12 side of it. Because obviously dual enrollment, it's higher ed and K-12. For example, some states have in state board rule and some in statute that high schools have to notify every parent of the opportunity to make sure everybody gets. So this is, and that's just an example. I'm not saying that's something we should do, but there's little things that we may do as a board if we decide we want to support that, because the research is pretty clear. And I'll look to Dr. Kaur that dual and concurrent enrollment can be a game changer for students.
Just real quickly, just before this meeting, the 10 community college CEOs were up in Flagstaff, and dual enrollment is one of our top legislative priorities for the coming year. So we did this exact same exercise in Flagstaff, and we've got 5 legislative priorities. One of them is dual enrollment. So there might be some synergy among many different parties.
And to that, so the work that I'm doing is with the College and High School Alliance, which is a national group of about, I don't know, 8 organizations. And a year and a half ago, they put out a state policy roadmap that they actually did for the National Governors Association. And it's just, 6 big areas, like 30 recommendations. And then I wrote the companion piece of that for the SPED portion. But it's a really good way to do a policy inventory, which I'm doing for Colorado and Rhode Island, but unique to SPED. But I just want to put that on our radar screen as something that we may want, especially if the community colleges are going to move forward. Of course, especially given what we'll see what the data shows. That's what I'm excited about, is what is the report going to show us? Because we've never really collected statewide data on this. This is a really big deal.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. There are 2 things I'd like us to look at that I think that are very important for our state to move forward. One is career and technical education. The reason why students go to school is so that they can get careers and jobs that basically are connected with their natural attributes. We have a lot of students who think they know what they want to do. They get out of high school and they start going to college for something that they found that they should not be doing. And now they're owing all this money and they should be doing something else. Career and technical education at the high school level, really at the 7th grade level, is imperative. We have to give our students the opportunities to see what is important, what their natural attribute is. And when I'm talking about students, I'm talking about from our special students all the way to those rocket scientists. We have 13 career clusters, and it's not about if you're going to college or not. It's about what you want to do. What is your natural attribute? If I'm a student and I want to go into medical, then that landscape is from working at a hospital as a hospitality aide all the way to a surgeon, okay? So we shouldn't stop any student. The same thing with law enforcement. That can go from a security guard to a judge. So it's not about some students shouldn't go to college. Some students shouldn't know. It's about what is the natural attribute in that student. And then let's find the education that they need to do that thing. And I think that, again, career and technical education is important. No one goes to school for a job in English or a job in math. Okay. We need to understand that core subjects and CTE subjects are interrelated and relevant. There should not be a we, they. There should not be a divide. And we need to teach our educational leaders, especially our principals, how to deal with our core teachers, our CT teachers, have them work together, cross-curricular, so that our students know that they need to understand the Pythagorean theory because they're going to go into welding or whatever the case is. We need to stop that divide. So I don't like to preach about this, but this is in my heart. For us to move forward, for us to move westward as a state, our future leaders need to know what they do naturally. We need to foster that from 7th grade before they get into the community colleges, so they'll know, so that we can get a great handoff to our colleges and universities instead of them being confused. That starts now. So we have ECAP. Another thing I want to look into is ECAP. ECAP is a non-funded mandate. Oh my goodness. The educational action plan of a student is the most important thing that we can do for our students. Regardless, again, when I'm talking about students, I'm talking about students from our special needs students all the way to the geniuses that's going to change, I don't know, change the world. I don't know. But the thing is, we need to stop dividing students up and saying, what can you do? Not what can't you do? And let's go ahead and find out, let's correlate all these different jobs based on what you can and cannot do. That cannot happen in the 11th and 12th grade. It has to start in the 7th grade. And as far as ECAP is concerned, we're supposed to be looking at these documents twice a year with our students, and we watch them grow and we watch them evolve, so that by the time they get into 12th grade, they will be rooted and grounded what they think they know. And I just want to tell a quick story about this. As a principal, I had a student. He went into, in my job, I had the CTE, I had science, and I had math, those 3 departments. I had a student come see me as an assistant principal. Why are you in my office? Why aren't you in class? Miss, I cannot do feet. What are you talking about? Well, he was in sports medicine. Okay. And as you know, so we have teachers in sports medicine. They are experts. So what's wrong? I'm not touching anybody's foot. He says, I get a gag reflex if I touch somebody's foot. And what they were doing, they were drawing all the bones on the person's foot with a, magic marker. He said, I'm not doing that. I said, can we do gloves? Nope, can't do it. I said, well, then that's not something that you should be doing. Let's go ahead and look. Let's go into auto. Yeah, let's do that. He's back in 3 weeks. Why in my office? You frequent flyer. Why are you back in my office? Dirty. I cannot get dirty. I'm not doing that. No, and it's right before lunch. I don't like that. Okay, let's go and relook at your interest inventory, which every student should be doing at the 7th grade. So we looked at his interest inventory again. Let's go and how about financial services? That is a CTE group. Okay, so what does he do? I see him 2 months later. How are you doing? Oh my goodness, people are drama. I love Excel spreadsheets. I love numbers. When I'm getting ready to go to the bank and get a job as a teller when I'm in 11th grade. I love mutual funds. I love this. He says, I want to go ahead and he was just excited. He was in the 10th grade. He may change up, right? But now he understands I need to do well in these classes. And now we have Chase Manhattan Bank and all these other, the credit union working with him, because out there in the public, they want their minions. They want to know who their people are. And we have to, in the school, we have to identify those people, because the businesses are the whipped cream and cherries of education. And we need to start including them into what we do instead of siloing it out, right? Okay, so again, I don't like to preach about this, but I'll say Northern Grumman. Here we go. Northern Grumman. They worked with a lot of our special needs students, and they found that these special needs students were amazing because they were very, very specific and detailed in what they did. And it was what we told our businesses: stop looking at what a student can't do. Look at their natural attributes and look what they can do. We have to start talking to the public, talking to businesses, talking to parents about the importance of career and technical education, because that is what that's why we are in school, period, regardless of what we do. All right, so here we go. This is my reason why I want us to start looking at the ECAP. That is a non-funded, statute, not statute, but what do you call it?
Unfunded mandate.
Yes, I couldn't remember. It's a non-funded mandate. As a principal, I did it, but everybody doesn't have to do it. They don't have the money to do it. They don't have the time to do it. But how awesome would that be as far as communities? We need to stop exporting our students and keeping them in our communities. And this is one of the ways to do it. So ECAP and CTE is what I'd like us to look at. I think I've made my point, huh? All right. Thank you very much.
I suspect we'll find some natural allies in the legislature around CTE. Certainly, there's been some interest there in recent years. So.
Yeah, so certainly, Dr. Core and Member Clay, I appreciate. No, and I think a lot of this up to this point has kind of been music to my ears in many ways, and things that I think resonate or remind of previous discussions. We've had some discussions internally and with ADE about ECAPs. ECAPs only exist in board rule. They were instituted when we came up with our most recent graduation requirements, which are about 8 years old now. And we've had ADE has moved part of their ECAP system to a new portal, but it's voluntary. And we have had discussions internally, and we had discussions with the former chief of staff at the Department of Ed before she left about, because that actually had previously fallen under her umbrella before she moved up to chief of staff, about what we needed to do to revisit that. And maybe it was with reforms in mind, but at the very least we've had this thing now for 8 years that hasn't been funded. And is it working the way that the board intended when they adopted it? And if not, then why not? So I think that's certainly worth looking at. Maybe it's legislative, but maybe it's not. And then on special education, there have been a host of some things that we've had to table. And actually that was part of the budget request for more support. We've had to table some reviews of special education rules and policies because we didn't have the capacity, and the legislature has now given us some support. So hopefully, and we have a couple members who can help drive that and help give us some expertise on it too. So I think that all resonates very well.
Yeah, Catcher, I think the Special Education Advisory Committee that's in statute can also be a tool or a lever or forum that the board can use. Statute says they're supposed to advise and consult with the state board. As a former member of that committee, I don't ever recall that happening. So I think that's, and it's, if you don't know, it's required under federal law. Every state has one. 50% of the members have to be parents. So it's an interesting, yeah, exactly. So it's an interesting opportunity that I don't think we've ever really maximized to be as a forum to help you guys work through some of this stuff and do some of the staff work and get that a place where people's opinions can be heard. The membership is very diverse. You've got charter school, district, teachers, again, 50% parents. So anyway, I'll put that on the side, but something for us to think about. To ECAPs, in my dual enrollment research, it's interesting to me that a lot of states, every state is struggling with what you said, Catcher. Almost every state has one, like Washington calls them high school and beyond plans. Rhode Island calls them ICAPs. ILPs, Colorado's, anyway, they all have them and they're all struggling with, even when there's some funding behind it, that it's not seen as just kind of another bureaucratic exercise and not
Mhm.
really being used as the tool to Member Clay's. So that's just know that that's kind of a universal struggle. But a lot of states kind of almost require like, it has to be built into your ICAP in order for you to take a dual enrollment. And not because they're trying to put another hurdle, but they're really trying to use it as a tool to think, okay, if you want to go to college, let's talk about dual and concurrent enrollment. That's the venue for you to get ready. So I just want to put that out there. I also wanted to say that under federal law, if you have an IEP, when you turn 16, you are required, the school is required to begin transition planning. Anybody with an IEP. Meaning that you have a college and career goal and the district lists, whatever it is. It's really the predecessor to what we now call ECAPs, that has been in federal law forever. But what's interesting is that doesn't turn 16. Almost every state starts their ICAPs either freshman year, some even go to middle school. 23 states have either through statute or state board rule lowered the age of transition for kids with IEPs to match that year. Because federal law is always the bottom, we can always exceed. And I had actually had a conversation with this with Superintendent Huffman, because that's somewhat some of the states struggle with is the dates don't align. And I just talked to an attorney recently who said, yeah, if you have an IEP, they spend the first year when they're 16 doing all the assessments and all the meetings. And then guess what? Now you only have one more year left because they're like a senior now. So it's also something for us to think about. In fact, Florida, most states have done 14 or freshman year. Florida just became the first state that went down to 12 years old for their transition planning. But again, the goal is to align it with all of those ECAP, college and career ready planning processes.
That's great. Thank you.
Just to piggyback on what Member Clay said, it'd be great to see if there's greater alignment between CTE's part of the statute and we have another section of the statute called the competence-based and career-ready educational pathways. Oftentimes the right and the left, and more importantly, industry have no idea what the other are talking about. And it would be helpful if there's greater alignment, because in theory, the laws that we actually have on the books are actually pretty good ideas, but the execution is not necessarily that. So when we're talking about professional pathways, we need to make sure that it's not, I respect teachers and their expertise, but sometimes their expertise is not aligned with what is required by industry. So if there's a way that we can play in whether it's the community college legislative priority of dual enrollment, what's in statute related to our current technical education programs, or specifically the competency-based college and college ready educational programs and pathways, it'd be great if there's some continuity and synergy. I'm not sure if there's a legislative action or if that's a ADE action. But if we can play a role, since we have an advisory role of all of those initiatives, I think that would be very helpful.
Julia, anything to? No? No. I think we'll certainly want to monitor, the expenditure limitation challenges that are going to be front and center with a lot of influx of dollars to K-12, the ability to spend them, and finding our role in making sure that something good comes of that situation. I'll also share, just from the community college perspective, 8 of the 10 districts in Arizona are hard up on their own expenditure limitation and are challenged by that. So hopefully there'll be some bipartisan work in that realm that we can lend support or expertise to at some point.
Got it. Sounds good. Okay, well, members, as I mentioned before, I will take a lot of this back. We'll put it in the grinder and see if we get some sausage. And we'll bring it back to the board for those items, or at least try to give you an update on where we're at with it. And some of it might be things that happen behind the scenes that we'll tap you on. And as we try to work through, some of them might be some action items you see, and some of them might be bills, but we'll see what comes out. And then as you gathered, and as I touched on before, this is sort of the proactive legislative process. The reactive legislative process is with that legislative team, and then the board can weigh in at those board meetings throughout the session. And of course, we can't really plan for that quite as much.
Because at various points during the session, we're playing offense, but sometimes we're playing defense.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes. Making bills better. So unless Alicia has something else for me that I might have missed or was supposed to hit on, I can hand it back with 5 minutes.
You yield your time to the chair.
Yes, but I reserve my time. In case I-
I want to bring up one thing as we move into the next agenda item, which is summary of board's retreat, next steps and future agenda items. Do members feel that they would like, one second. Would members like a glorious training opportunity with Kim Anderson from the Assistant Attorney General's office on open meeting law? And I ask because I went through her training with the PPAC members, and it was so great. Okay, cool. So I'll work on like setting that up with their office, and then we'll record it so that it will live within our files forever if you ever need refreshers, but it's really good. I think we had a great retreat. I really loved the conversation and communication. I can see that there's a real want to have more of that kind of dialogue and civil disagreement or success of different education policy and topics. So we can work on scheduling those types of things. I have in my notes approximately 7 areas that I think the board, based upon the conversations across all agenda topics, including legislative, can start looking at, whether it's the fall or starting in January, but coming up with a really great strategic plan on where the board's going to go next. And it's very interesting to me because as we're talking about college and career, CTEDs, competencies, business, special education, dual enrollment. I mean, it all really comes back to putting kids first and defining what a quality school is, right? So I'm going to play around with some concepts and see if we can incorporate multiple different areas to really form like a good, strong policy package and strategic plan for the board. What's next? We have 3 board meetings. It will be a very busy fall. Accountability season is upon us. Not to be confused with spooky season. I anticipate a good rollout for the first time that we will release letter grades and set cut scores in 2 years. We will, at the September board meeting, look at just information discussion only on cut scores. Previously, the State Board of Education has set cut scores utilizing the standard deviation. Then they would take the standard deviation and compare it with that New Year's data standard deviation. And previously had voted to keep cut scores steady. I don't know what will occur in September and what type of options will be brought forth to the board. Because the board understanding COVID, assessments, etc. October, we will look to set those cut scores. Letter grades are released by November 1st, but our work does not end because at the same time, the appeals process starts. letter grades would be finalized at the December board meeting.
We're also actively taking a look at the date for the October board.
Oh, that's
meeting.
correct. Yes. So could you please look at your calendars and let me know your availability within October. We have to be cognizant of the November. We have to be cognizant of the November 1st deadline. And really, we're looking at the week of October 17th. Potentially the 17th. The 18th. Or the 21st. Instead of the 24th. I apologize. I just send me an email so I can keep them all in one place. I'll probably ask you again in a staff update.
Yeah.
Just so I can keep track of it. We do have a room that would be available on Friday, the 21st, but it's only available until noon and it's subject to it's subject to us being removed by the governor's office if the governor's office decides that they need it. Office construction in the new boardroom is supposed to be done by November. But they originally told me August, so.
We're building a lot of things on campus. Nothing is coming on time or budget, so.
No. So yes. Look for emails from me pertaining to board meeting dates and times. As we have to be flexible with like room availability and cognizant of timelines. Both at the staff, state board staff working level, but also the department staff and their accountability team. Dr. Kaur, was there anything else that you and I have discussed the past couple of weeks? Okay.
No, I would just like to express my appreciation for everyone, giving up, coming down and giving up a Friday and a big chunk of Saturday, in addition to what everyone's already busy scheduled. Just my sincere appreciation and, just again, the preparation and passion and effort that everyone brought to the table over the last couple of days. Really, really kind of great to see.
I second that. And thank you to the University of Arizona staff for really assisting all of us with everything we needed. So I really appreciate that. And thank you to Dr. Robbins for hosting us. It was very nice. And we'll be back. Okay, well, take care, drive carefully, unless there's anything else any members would like to put on our radar.
Meeting adjourned 11:48.
Okay, thank you.